In a world where every emotion is digitized, we search for the rare, flickering pulse of a genuine human heart. Experience the deep connection between man and machine in our latest neon-lit cinematic series. Hit that subscribe button now and stay tuned for the ultimate digital journey.
The moment I walked into that boardroom, I felt 15 years collapse into a single breath. My brother was already seated at the head of the table. He didn't look up when I entered. He never did anymore. He was talking to someone on his phone, laughing at something, one hand resting on the armrest of our father's old leather chair like he'd been sitting there his entire life. Maybe in his mind, he had been. I stood near the door for a moment. The room smelled the same. Cedar and old paper and something metallic underneath, like money that had changed hands too many times. Floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. Downtown Cincinnati laid out like a map. Our father had loved that view. He used to say you could see everything that mattered from up here. I used to believe him. My name is Rachel. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed CPA with a master's in financial law. I have a husband named Daniel, who I've been married to for 4 years, and a small apartment in Columbus that I love more than anywhere I've ever lived. I have a life that is quiet and steady and entirely mine. And 15 years ago, my brother Marcus stood in our parents' driveway, handed me a garbage bag with some of my clothes in it, and told me that if I didn't sign the document our father had prepared, I was no longer welcome in the family home. I was 16 years old. I didn't sign. I want to tell you something before I go further, because I think it matters. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I've had enough years of distance to understand that what happened to me was wrong, but it didn't break me. If anything, it built me into someone who understood exactly what was being taken, why it was being taken, and eventually, how to get it back through every legitimate channel available under Ohio corporate law. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My father built Whitmore Financial Consulting from nothing. That part is true, and I've never disputed it. He was brilliant with numbers, relentless with clients, and genuinely visionary in a way that people in this industry rarely are. I loved him for it when I was young. I used to sit in his study while he worked, and he would explain things to me. Compound interest, portfolio diversification, the way leverage could be a tool or a trap depending on who was holding it. I absorbed everything. Marcus, 3 years older than me, absorbed everything. Marcus, 3 years older than me, absorbed almost none of it. He wasn't interested in the work. He was interested in the status. For most of my childhood, this didn't matter much. There was room for both of us. But when I was 14, my father sat us both down and told us he had been thinking about succession. He wanted the company to stay in the family. He was looking at both of us seriously. I think that was the moment something shifted in Marcus. Because until that point, he had assumed the company was already his by default oldest child, only son. The idea that it might go to me instead, or even be split between us, seemed to rearrange something in him that never quite went back into place. The next 2 years were a slow erosion of everything I thought I understood about my family. My father started changing. Or maybe I started seeing him more clearly. I'm still not entirely sure which. He became more distant with me, more critical. Small things at first. A comment about how I dressed. A suggestion that my interest in the financial side of the business was aggressive for a girl my age. A laugh shared with Marcus over something I'd said that I hadn't realized was funny. My mother watched all of it from a careful distance. She was a gentle woman, my mother. The kind of person who kept the peace so reflexively she probably didn't realize she was doing it. She never took my side openly. But sometimes she would find me in my room at night and sit on the edge of my bed and say things like, "Your father loves you, Rachel," in his way. And Marcus is just finding himself, you have to be patient. She meant well. I know she meant well. The document arrived on my 16th birthday. That part still strikes me as either deeply symbolic or deeply cruel. Possibly both. My father called me into his study after dinner, and Marcus was already there, and there was a single piece of paper on the desk. It was a family agreement, not legally binding in the traditional sense, I would later learn, but designed to function as a framework for how the business would be structured when my father eventually stepped back. The short version, Marcus would become sole heir to the company's controlling interest. I would receive a cash settlement to be determined at the time of transfer. I was being asked to agree to this arrangement in writing, in exchange for what my father described as clarity and family unity. I read it twice. Then I looked up at my father and asked him why. He said Marcus was better suited to lead. He said the business world was difficult for women. He said he wanted me to have options, freedom, a life that wasn't tied to something as demanding as what he had built. I said I didn't want to sign. Marcus said something under his breath. I didn't catch all of it, but I heard the word ungrateful. My father said that if I wasn't willing to support the family's decision, then perhaps I needed time to reconsider my priorities. He said it calmly, the way he said most things, like it was a reasonable business position. I said I needed time to think. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, Marcus had gone through my room and put what he decided were my belongings into a black garbage bag. By Friday morning, my father told me I had until noon to make a decision. By noon, I was standing in the driveway holding the bag, and Marcus was telling me that I knew where the door was. My mother was standing in the upstairs window. I looked up at her. She looked back at me for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the glass. I walked to the end of the driveway. I kept walking. I didn't look back again. I won't dwell too long on the years between because this story isn't about suffering. It's about what you build when you have nothing and you know exactly why it was taken from you. I stayed with a high school friend's family for 3 weeks before I understood I couldn't impose indefinitely. I found a shelter. I found a part-time job at a copy center. I finished my GED at 17, enrolled in community college at 18 on a combination of financial aid and a small scholarship. Transferred to Ohio State at 20, graduated with honors at 22. I went straight into a master's program. I specialized in financial law, not by accident, but by intention. Because I wanted to understand every mechanism my father had used and every mechanism that might exist to address it. I met Daniel in my second year of graduate school. He was quiet and careful and exceptionally good at listening, which was exactly what I needed and didn't know I needed. We were friends for a year before we were anything else. When I told him the full story, not the abbreviated version I gave most people, but all of it, he didn't offer sympathy or outrage. He asked me a single question. He asked, "Have you looked at the company's incorporation documents?" I had not, at least not yet. That question opened a door I'd been circling for years without knowing how to enter. Here's what I found. Over the following 18 months of careful and entirely legal research, my father's company had been incorporated with a dual-class share structure. Class A shares, which carried voting rights, and Class B shares, which were non-voting but carried economic interest. Marcus had been given controlling Class A shares. What neither Marcus nor my father had apparently tracked carefully was the Class B distribution, a portion of which had been allocated to a trust that had been set up in my name when I was 7 years old, as part of an estate planning arrangement my father had made with his attorney at the time. That trust had never been dissolved. No one had ever asked me to sign it away because apparently no one had remembered it existed or assumed it was negligible or assumed I would never find it. It was not negligible. The Class B shares didn't give me voting control, but they gave me economic standing, and economic standing under certain conditions of financial mismanagement or breach of fiduciary duty, which I had also found evidence of, carefully documented over 14 months, gave me legal grounds to act. I didn't rush. Daniel always says, that's the thing about me that most people don't understand until they've known me for a while. I don't rush. I think. I prepare. I wait for the right moment with a patience that sometimes even surprises me. The right moment arrived in the form of a shareholder meeting. Whitmore Financial Consulting held its annual shareholder meeting every April. It was largely a formality. Marcus controlled the votes. The small number of outside investors were passive. And my father, who had officially stepped back from operations 2 years prior after a health decline, attended by video call. I had retained an attorney 6 months earlier. Her name is Patricia, and she is one of the most precise legal minds I have ever encountered, which is saying something given that I work in this field. Together, we had filed the appropriate documentation to establish my standing as a Class B shareholder of record. The company's own registered agent had confirmed receipt. Everything was in order. No one had told Marcus. I don't say that with satisfaction exactly. I say it as a fact. His attorney should have caught it. His accountant should have caught it. His accountant should have caught it. The fact that they didn't reflects the same carelessness with the underlying structure that had created the fiduciary issues I had documented in the first place. I arrived at the Whitmore Financial offices on the 4th floor of a building downtown at 9:45 in the morning on a Tuesday in April. I was wearing a charcoal blazer and my hair was up and I had a leather portfolio under my arm. I took the elevator. I walked through the glass doors. The receptionist looked up and asked if she could help me. I told her my name. She looked at her screen, looked back at me. I could see the moment she recognized the last name. She asked me to wait. Marcus came out of the conference room himself. I'll give him that. He didn't send someone. He walked out and stopped about 6 feet from me in the lobby. And for a moment, we just looked at each other. 15 years is a long time. He was heavier now, and the confidence that used to read as energy had settled into something slower and more certain of itself. He was wearing a good suit. He always did like good suits. He looked at me the way you look at something you dropped a long time ago and assumed was gone. Then he said, "You don't have business here, Rachel." I said, "I'm a shareholder of record. I'm here for the annual meeting." He said that was not possible. I opened my portfolio and handed him the documentation. He took it the way people take things they don't want to touch. Fingertips, slight lean back, eyes moving fast across the page. I watched his expression change. There's a particular quality to the moment when someone who has held power over you for a long time realizes the architecture of that power has been structurally compromised. It doesn't look like anger, at least not at first. It looks more like recalculation, like someone trying to run a familiar equation and getting an answer that doesn't fit. He told me to wait in the lobby. I sat down and I waited. 20 minutes later, Marcus came back with 2 other men. One I recognized as the company's in-house counsel. One I didn't know. They sat down across from me in the small seating area near the reception desk. The in-house counsel had a folder. The man I didn't know had his arms crossed and was looking at me with an expression that I can only describe as professionally skeptical. The unknown man introduced himself as the company's outside advisor on corporate governance. His name was Richard. He told me in the measured tone of someone who has dismissed a great many inconvenient people that the Class B shares in the trust were legacy instruments with no current standing, that the trust had lapsed under terms I wasn't aware of, and that my presence at a shareholder meeting was not something the company was prepared to accommodate. I let him finish. Then I said, "Patricia," and my attorney, who had been sitting in the coffee shop across the street for the past 40 minutes, came through the glass doors. I want to be precise about what happened next, because I know how these stories can sound when they're told in retrospect. I'm not going to pretend it was a dramatic scene from a movie. It was, in fact, very quiet. Legal precision has a tendency to be quiet. There isn't usually shouting. There's mostly just the sound of people reading documents they were not prepared to receive. Patricia had filed a motion the previous week with the state court establishing my shareholder standing and requesting an injunction against any meeting decisions that materially affected Class B economic interests without proper notice to all shareholders of record. The judge had granted the injunction at 8:15 that morning. Richard read the document. He read it again. He exchanged a look with the in-house counsel that I found, and I'm being honest here, somewhat satisfying. Marcus was standing slightly apart from the group, and he was looking at me, not at the documents. I looked back at him. He said, quietly, "This isn't what you think it's going to accomplish." I said, "I know exactly what it's going to accomplish. So does Patricia." He said I was doing this out of bitterness. I said I was doing this because I own a portion of this company. I have always owned a portion of this company, and the fiduciary irregularities I have documented over the past 14 months represent a material breach of the duty owed to all economic stakeholders, including me. He told me that our father was not well, that this would hurt him. I'd been waiting for that one. I said, "I know Dad isn't well. I've spoken to his doctor. I've spoken to his attorney. His personal attorney, not the company's. I've also spoken to him directly 3 weeks ago, for the first time in 15 years. The room went very still. Marcus said, "That's not true." I said, "He called me. He found my number through my firm's website. We talked for 2 hours. I opened my portfolio again and placed a single sheet of paper on the coffee table. It was a letter, handwritten, signed by my father. I had made 3 notarized copies. Patricia had one. My safe deposit box had one. This was the 3rd. I watched Marcus read it. I won't share everything my father wrote in that letter. Some of it is private in a way that still belongs to him and to me, and not to this story. But the relevant part, the part that mattered for what came next, was this. My father wrote that the original document he had asked me to sign at 16 had been presented to him by Marcus as a straightforward succession agreement. He had not known at the time about the trust or the Class B allocation. His attorney at the time had handled the estate planning without fully briefing him on its interaction with the corporate structure. He also wrote that in the years since, he had become aware that certain financial decisions Marcus had made on behalf of the company were ones he would not have authorized. He named specific transactions. He noted specific transactions. He noted specific dates. He wrote that he was sorry. He wrote it simply, without elaboration, in 2 sentences. I have read those 2 sentences more times than I can count. Richard looked up from the letter and asked, without particular expression, whether Patricia had filed this with the court as well. Patricia said she had filed a notarized copy with the company's registered agent at 9 this morning. Marcus sat down. He sat down in one of the lobby chairs like his legs had simply decided to stop holding him up. The in-house counsel said something quietly to Richard. Richard nodded slowly. I looked at my brother. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the middle distance and the way people do when they are rapidly revising a version of the future they had already started living in. I had imagined this moment for a long time. Not with anger. I had moved through anger somewhere in my mid-20s and come out the other side of it into something cooler and more purposeful. I had imagined it with clarity, with precision, with the satisfaction of something correctly executed. I had imagined saying something, but sitting there in that lobby, looking at my brother in that chair, I didn't feel the need to say anything at all. The document said it. 15 years of careful, methodical work said it. The injunction said it. My father's letter said it. I picked up my portfolio. I stood up. I told Patricia I'd see her too for our follow-up. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. The doors opened. Behind me, I heard Marcus say my name. I turned around. He looked not small, exactly, but diminished, the way a room looks when you take out the thing that was making it seem larger than it was. He asked me what I wanted. I said, an independent audit and a seat at the table for any restructuring decisions. Patricia has the full terms. He said, and if we don't agree, I said, then we proceed with the litigation, and the fiduciary findings become part of the public record, and we let the court sort it out. I'm comfortable either way. The elevator doors started to close. I let them close. I rode down to the lobby and walked out onto the street, and it was a bright April morning in Cincinnati, cool and clear, and Daniel was standing on the sidewalk across from the building, hands in his jacket pockets. I had told him he didn't need to be there. He had come anyway. He looked at me and raised his eyebrows in that particular way he has. The way that means everything without asking anything. I crossed the street. I said, it went well. He said, of course it did. We walked to a coffee place 2 blocks away, and I had the best cup of coffee I've ever had in my life, which I recognize has more to do with the morning than with the coffee. Here's what I want you to take from this, if you take anything at all. I spent 15 years building something that couldn't be taken from me. Not status, not a title, not a position inside a structure that someone else controlled. Knowledge, credentials, a documented, legally supported understanding of exactly what I was owed and exactly how to claim it to every appropriate channel. The night my brother put my belongings in a garbage bag and handed them to me on the driveway, I was 16 years old and I had nothing. But I also had something he never understood. I had been sitting in my father's study for years, absorbing everything. I had been paying attention in a way that Marcus never thought to. He assumed that taking the company would be simple, because he assumed I was simple. That assumption was the beginning of his problem. I'm not asking you to admire me for being patient. Patience isn't a virtue when it's all you have. It's just a strategy. I'm asking you to consider that the people who count you out are usually counting on you to believe them. They are counting on the 16-year-old standing on the driveway to feel too small, too alone, too far from anything that looks like power to ever find her way back. And some of us do feel that way. For a long time, I won't pretend otherwise. But some of us also get very, very good at math. The independent audit is underway. The restructuring conversations are ongoing. My father and I have spoken 4 more times since that first phone call. They are short conversations, careful on both sides, full of the particular weight of things that were not said for too long. I don't know what they will become. I'm not trying to force them into a shape. Some things need more time than others. My mother passed away 2 years ago. I didn't know until I found an obituary while doing the research into the company records. I sat with that for a long time. I still sit with it sometimes. There are things I would have said, There are things I think she would have said back. I made a kind of peace with not knowing exactly what they would have been. What I know is this. She saw me walk to the end of that driveway. She saw me keep walking. I think, in her way, she always knew I would come back. I think she would have been glad I came back on my own terms. There is a version of this story where I become bitter, where I spend 15 years replaying the driveway, the garbage bag, my mother's face in the upstairs window, where the anger becomes the whole of me and I let it. I chose a different version, not because I was noble about it, I wasn't, not always, but because I understood something early on that took me a while to put into words. What was done to me was not an accident. It was a calculation. Marcus calculated that I was young enough, isolated enough, and rattled enough to disappear quietly and stay disappeared. My father calculated that the path of least resistance ran straight through me. They made those calculations because they believed I had nothing, no leverage, no knowledge, no patience to outlast them. Every single thing I built in the years that followed was a direct answer to that calculation. That's what I mean when I say this story is about cause and effect. Not luck, not fate. Cause and effect. I chose to study the exact instruments that had been used against me. I chose to build credentials in a field where knowledge is armor. I chose to document, carefully and without emotion, every financial irregularity I found. Not out of vengeance, but because the truth of what happened deserved a record. Actions accumulate. They compound, the way interest compounds, quietly and without announcement, until one April morning, they are simply undeniable. Marcus made choices too. He chose to assume that control was the same thing as security. He chose to run a company with the carelessness of someone who believes the structure beneath them is permanent. He chose for 15 years never to look too carefully at the paperwork. Those choices compounded as well. In the opposite direction, this is what I want Rachel's story, my story, to mean to you, if it means anything at all. The three things that actually protect you in this life are not money, not connections, not the name on a building. They are what you know, what you are willing to do with what you know, and whether you have the endurance to keep building when no one is watching and no one is applauding and the outcome is genuinely uncertain. Integrity, intelligence, and persistence, not as abstract values, as daily practices, as the specific, unglamorous work of showing up for yourself when everyone who was supposed to show up for you did not. I sat across from my brother in that lobby and I felt none of the things I expected to feel. No triumph, exactly. No vindication in the dramatic sense. What I felt was something quieter. The particular steadiness of a person who prepared for a long time and then, when the moment came, was simply ready. That steadiness was not given to me. I built it. One decision at a time, over 15 years, in the absence of anyone's support but my own. Whatever was taken from you, and something has been taken from most people, in one form or another, the question is never really whether you can get it back. The question is what you become in the process of trying. I became someone who understood the architecture of what had been done and could navigate it precisely. That knowledge belongs to no one but me. No one can put it in a garbage bag. No one can hand it back across a driveway and tell me to leave. That is the only kind of ownership that cannot be disputed.